Today, we're diving into a really powerful paper by Valeria Kierbel. It poses a fundamental question. Can psychoanalysis, as a field, actually make space for the very identities it historically labeled as a problem? This isn't just a minor tweak. It's a challenge to the very way we think about knowledge itself. This single sentence, wow, it's really the heart of our story. It's not from a courtroom, it's the verdict from an academic exam. And it's this moment that kicks off a radical rethinking of an entire discipline. Now, this isn't just some abstract academic debate. The paper uses a deeply personal story as what it calls a conceptual prism. It's about a lesbian candidate training to be a Jungian analyst in Argentina, whose very identity becomes the central issue in her evaluation. This story makes a huge systemic problem feel incredibly real and personal. All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start with that story, then we'll dissect the underlying problem in psychoanalysis. After that, we'll explore a whole new metaphor for knowledge, introduce a new framework called woven ways of knowing, and finally, we'll talk about why all of this really truly matters. So let's start with that initial confrontation. How does one person's experience suddenly blow the doors wide open on a much larger, deeply embedded issue? So here's the scene. The candidate's paper is dismissed as activism, not real analysis. But the real issue, the one that cuts to the bone, comes out in the examiner's final question. How would her visible queerness affect the therapeutic space? Think about that. The implication is that her identity itself is a kind of contagion, a threat to the supposedly sterile, neutral environment of analysis. Okay, so that's the what of the story. Now let's get into the why. Why would a field that's all about understanding the human mind see certain identities as a fundamental threat to its own practice? This question is a bit of a bombshell, isn't it? It completely challenges the old idea of the perfectly neutral analyst. Kierbel's point is that heterosexual analysts are also projecting sexual information all the time, but it's just seen as the invisible norm. The ability to not be seen as having a sexuality, well, that's a form of privilege. This brings us to a really crucial concept, epistemic silence. And this isn't just about people not knowing things. The paper calls it a violent politic. It's the active process of erasing entire groups of people from theory and history by just leaving them out or dismissing their experiences. And building right on top of that is Monique Wittig's idea of the straight mind. Again, this isn't just an information gap. It's a deep-seated psychic resistance, an active, powerful desire not to know anything that might challenge the heterosexual framework as the default for everything. Now, psychoanalysis doesn't get a pass here. Kierbel argues that the field was actually instrumental in creating what's called the epistemology of sexual difference, the very system that set up heterosexuality as the norm and turned everything else into a pathology to be studied. So, if the foundational stories and the very tools you're using are actually part of the problem, well, you can't just tinker around the edges. You have to build something new from the ground up. And this is where the paper gets really exciting and creative. It suggests we need a whole new central metaphor. We need to move away from the idea of the lone conquering hero and embrace a more communal, collaborative model, the weaver. To help us understand this shift, Kierbel brings in the brilliant Ursula K. Le Guin. Le Guin contrasted the classic hero's epic, linear, all about conquest, with her idea of the carrier bag story. She argued the bag, not the spear, was the first and most important cultural tool. It's a way of telling stories that's about gathering and connecting, not dominating and winning. And I just love this quote from Le Guin. It perfectly captures how the whole heroic model, which needs this big stage to stand on, just looks kind of silly when you put it into a framework of collective gathering. The hero is just another item in the bag, like a potato. So, the carrier bag leads us directly to the metaphor of weaving. Kierbel, drawing on another amazing thinker, Donna Haraway, presents weaving as more than just a pretty image. It's a machine of thought, a practical way to create new patterns by connecting all these different, separate threads. And Kierbel's own paper is a perfect example of this in action. She's literally weaving together threads from thinkers like Anne Zaldua, Le Guin, Haraway, Wittig, and decolonial feminists. It shows that new knowledge doesn't just spring from one heroic mind. It's a collective effort, woven together. So this weaving idea sounds great, but what does it actually look like in practice? This question brings us to the paper's formal proposal. a new framework for how we can produce knowledge in psychology. Here it is, the core proposal, woven Onto-Epistemologies. I know, that's a mouthful, but the idea behind it is actually pretty intuitive. It fuses ontology, which is about what is, with epistemology, which is about how we know. The point is that you can't separate them. The act of knowing, the weaving itself, is what creates the reality that is known. Knowledge isn't something you just find. It's something you actively and collectively make. And this new framework is really built on 4 practical commitments. First, acknowledge that all knowledge comes from somewhere. It's partial and embodied, not universal. Second, look outside your own field. Third, understand that we only exist in relation to others. The self is a process. And fourth, use cooperative methods. Theorize with people, not about them. Okay, so we've talked about the problem, the new metaphor, and the framework. Let's bring it all home. In the real world, why does this shift from a solo hero to a collective weaver actually matter? And this might be the most important takeaway of all. The goal here isn't just to add diversity as a new topic to an old syllabus. It's not about pinning a new butterfly to an old board. The goal is to change the board itself. It's a call to fundamentally transform how we think and research, making the whole process more ethical, responsible, and truly inclusive. Carl Jung, the very founder of this particular school of thought, once wrote that the world hangs on a thin thread, and that is the psyche of man. And that's a powerful image for sure, but it's also a very fragile and solitary one. The entire weight of the world on one single thread. But Kierbel, channeling Donna Haraway, leaves us with a totally different vision. What if the world doesn't hang on just one thread, but on many? And what if our job isn't to protect that one fragile thread, but to weave them all together? To see the patterns, to tie new knots, and to continue the embroidery as a collective? It's a profound shift from solitary protection to collective creation.